As some of you may know, I recently pulled for my second S6 character in the game, being Phoebe, but that got me thinking, what are the best sequences in the entire game? And if you're a free-to-play or low spender, which ones are the best ones to go for? That's what I'm going to be answering in this video. First, I'm going to discuss some very good sequences that are absolutely worth it if you can get them, and then finally, I'm going to talk about what I believe to be the best sequence in the entire game. So the first sequence I'm going to discuss is going to be Phoebe. Now, Phoebe doesn't have one standout sequence. She has a couple of sequences that are 100% worth it, mainly being her S2, S3, and S6, but mainly focusing on the S2 and 3 because those are the most likely to get as a low spender or free-to-play player. Now, when you read through her sequences, it's not going to sound all that impressive. Her first sequence will massively boost up her Resonance Liberation's damage. However, her Resonance Liberation isn't that much of her total damage per rotation anyway, so most people wouldn't really be that impressed with it. Well, that would be a fallacy in my opinion, because you're getting so much damage in one hit, aka so much damage that is not reliant on Spectrofrazzle on the enemy. This is going to be a massive help in Whimpering Wastes especially, because in there, managing your Spectrofrazzle application is incredibly important, so you get an extra wave nuke that doesn't need Frazzle, which is very nice. Additionally, because this ability has great AoE, you can use it to nuke a wave within Tower of Adversity. Okay, well not entirely nuke, because enemies there are pretty beefy, but you'll be able to do a lot of damage and save your heavy attack for later waves. So, considering the fact that this ability is so front-loaded, the damage increase that you get out of it should not be underestimated. Her S2 is the opposite, where it amplifies the damage of her Ultra skill by 120%. This is a massive damage increase, and allows you to completely obliterate a boss's HP bar with it. It is a higher overall damage increase than the S1, but it is more backloaded, so that is something that you have to keep in mind. It also still requires Spectrofrazzle, so keep that in mind. And then her S3, which is a straight up 91% damage increase for her heavy attack Starflash. And because that is the biggest damage contributor in her kit, this is a massive buff. So Phoebe's sequence 1, 2, and 3 are all very strong. Next, I want to turn to Carlotta. Carlotta has some of the strongest sequence 2 and 3 in the entire game. Her S1's kind of whatever, the crit rate's nice, but it's not really gonna be a huge deal. But mainly what you're looking for here are the S2 and 3. Both of them are pretty simple, just being very big multiplier increases to her skill and her Fatal Finale respectively. But because both of these are such massive damage contributors, they're going to be increasing your Carlos's damage by so much that it will look very worth it despite them being so boring to read. Because her Fatal Finale is a massive nuke, and her S2 more than doubles it, so you can very easily see more than 600,000 damage on it, which is a lot of damage. Her S3 adds even more power onto her damage by buffing her skill, which is already a strong ability, but this just makes it even better. Then going to yet another DPS character. Are you noticing a theme here? Well, we're talking about S2 Camellya this time. Camellya is, again, a very strong DPS character, as you've probably noticed from the characters I've been talking about. And her S1 and 2 are very similar to those of Carlotta, who I spent quite a good amount of time discussing earlier, with the S1 being a manageably high crit buff, and the S2 being a massive multiplier bonus to the biggest nuke within the character's kit. I've kind of already discussed most of what there is to say when I talked about Carlotta, with the biggest advantages that Camellya has being just the ones that are inherent to her kit, being essentially just her higher AoE. There's not much to discuss here because I've already discussed everything there is to say when I talked about Carlotta's sequence 1 and 2. And now to complete the four-facta, I guess, of the best DPS characters in the entire game, I have to talk about Jinhsi. But unlike the other characters, Jinhsi doesn't have that good of a strong S2. The reason that her S2 is good is mainly for overworld, and to save you like 5 seconds for not having to do Jinhsi's opener. But here's the thing, Jinhsi's S1 completely makes up for this, being an incredibly powerful tool that a lot of people should be having a lot of fun with, I hope. So it is not as clear-cut as Carlotta and Camellya's S2, I'll say that. They just chose the more than double the biggest hit in their kit. But if Jinhsi were to do that, she would just be absurd, because the biggest hit in her kit is like 60% of her overall damage per rotation. So in a vacuum, it's not as good as Carlotta and Camellya S2, but because her big nuke is so much higher than those other two, it is definitely made up for. 80% damage bonus on her skill is an incredible buff, especially because the skill does so much damage. If there was anything that was not a TOA boss that wasn't being one-shot by your skill yet, it will now be one-shot by your skill. It's just that simple. And because Jinhsi gets to use it twice per rotation, considering the fact that her rotations are so fast, it is honestly just a really big increase. And I don't see enough people talk about it anymore after Carlotta and Camellya came out, because it is still an incredibly strong sequence. I wanted to talk about two more characters, because while they do have strong sequences, I don't think they're on the same level as the characters I've previously discussed, being Roccia and Xiangli Yao. Roccia first. Her S1 allows her to generate more Forte and Concerto energy when using her Resonance skill. Now, while it may look like the only thing this does is allow her to skip her 4th basic attack, it also allows so she's able to just completely ignore her intro skill in the first place, which is pretty powerful if you ask me, because double intro Camellya rotations are very much a thing that people actually run. So being able to skip Roccia's intro skill so you can use Camellya's twice is actually a pretty big deal if you ask me. Her S2 will make it so you get a lot of extra Havoc damage bonus on the next character you swap into, which is a very good buff considering the fact that Roccia mainly works with Havoc damage carries. But I find Roccia's nicheness as a character, for TOA specifically, to be a big downside for her sequences. Why would you ever want to invest into Roccia's sequences when Camellya's are better? Unless you already have Camellya's sequences, in which case she's so powerful that I don't really see the need to go for it. While I don't think many people should go for Roccia sequences, they're definitely very powerful if you want to vertically invest into your Roccia. And then next up there's Xiangli Yao, being his S1. His S1 makes it so whenever you use his Forte skill within his ultimate, you will gain 8 extra hits of damage, dealing 6% of the Forte skill's damage. When you do a little bit of quick math, you can see that this will be 48% of the Forte skill's damage, and considering just how much of Xiangli Yao's damage is coming from this, a 48% increase in this ability is honestly an incredible damage bonus, one that I feel is not talked about as much as I feel like it should be. And now it's finally time for me to talk about the best sequence in the entire game. One that has been shown off this entire time, and you've probably not even noticed it, because guess what? We all take this character for granted, but if you don't have her, you realize just how much you're missing her. And who else could I be talking about other than the Shorekeeper? She is the best character in the entire game, and I doubt I have to explain to anyone why this is the case. She is the most universal support in the game, played in almost every single team there is. The only character that I can really say can confidently skimp out on using Shorekeeper is Phoebe, but even then, Shorekeeper's still a good teammate with Phoebe, so there's no one who can truly escape the Shorekeeper. And guess what? She has some of the best early sequences in the entire game as well, because, you know what, this character wasn't good enough, right? First of all, the S1. The S1 is not as impressive, because the S2 just looks so busted, but it's still a good sequence. It extends her ultimate by 10 seconds, gives it way more range, and makes it so it's not detonated when Shorekeeper uses her intro skill. The duration increase is one that, if you play well, you won't see, because your rotations are already being done correctly, so you don't need more time of the Stellar Realm. However, if you're a bit slower, the extra duration can really help. The range is also very useful when you're fighting a boss like Tempest Mephis, which will go all around the place, or maybe even the Inferno Rider or the Monkey, or worst of all, Impermanence Heron, so the range increase is a big quality of life improvement. However, I think that the free intro skill that doesn't destroy the Stellar Realm is another big plus, because it means that in teams where you want to avoid a specific character's intro skill, like Kalcharos because it takes 10 years, you get the chance to use Shorekeeper's intro skill in Quick Swap and not needing to use Kalcharos. You can just avoid it, which is a pretty big bonus if you ask me. However, we all know the real meat in her sequences is that S2. It's really simple at a baseline, just 40% attack. But 40% attack can't be that much, right? Well, you say that and then you realize it's more than 4 rolls of attack percent on your echoes. It's more than a free cost main stat. 40% attack is an incredible amount, and will massively buff any DPS you use with her. And while Shorekeeper S2 might not be as big as a Carlotta S2, you have to realize that Carlotta S2 is only used in a Carlotta team. Shorekeeper S2 is a buff everywhere. If you pull for Shorekeeper S2, you're buffing your GN, you're buffing your Xiangli Yao, you're buffing your Carlotta, you're buffing your Camellya, you're buffing your Jinhsi, you're even buffing your Phoebe. Because if you're Shorekeeper's S2, guess what? Phoebe wants her now! Shorekeeper S2 makes her best in slot in whatever team you want to play her in, no matter if she was best in slot before or not. So it has to be the best sequence in the entire game. If there's any sequence you were thinking of saving for, Shorekeeper S2 is the answer. But what do you think is the best sequence in the game? Did you pull for any sequences? I know I sure have. Plenty of times, actually. So let me know in the comments below which sequences you've pulled for. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I've also been streaming more recently, every Saturday at 2 PM Central European Time. So be sure to check that out if you can. You can also join my Discord or follow me on Twitter, which are both linked in the description below, if you want to ask me any questions. But that'll be it from me. Peace.